I want to start with a very important disclaimer. For the sake of reviewing this movie, I'm going to be talking about things like depression and thoughts of death. If you feel that those topics could be triggering to you, I'd recommend watching a different video, but I have also provided some resources in the description below in case those are things that you might struggle with. So Sometimes I Think About Dying is a dramedy about an introvert's life and her infatuation with a new coworker. In this movie, we follow Fran, played by Daisy Ridley. She lives a pretty mundane lifestyle, exclusively revolving around going to work at a small office and then going home and eating. And that's about it. She's clearly very reserved. She doesn't really interact with her coworkers, despite them always talking to each other, and she has a pretty serious lack of social skills. This movie is a character study about detachment. It's about the difficulties of navigating work, life, and romance with the constant pain of feeling like you just don't meld with anyone around you. Fran is the embodiment of our deepest insecurities around how we are perceived by others and struggling to come off as normal and building connections. Because she does want to get out of her shell and connect with Robert, played by Dave Merhedge, once he comes into the picture, she just doesn't really know how to do this. Despite him and Fran being very different people, they take notice of each other and start hanging out. Robert is the workplace funny guy. He's always joking around, even though his jokes are very bland. Probably my favorite thing about this movie was the awkward workplace interactions going down at the office. Their team consists of a very diverse blend of personalities, so seeing everyone clash was very reminiscent of what the workplace is often like. If you've ever worked in an office before, this could be very relatable. There's this really wonderful scene where Robert is first introduced to the rest of the office, and they do that whole thing where they each go around saying one thing about themselves. This scene was absolutely hilarious. And the laughs just kept coming out the more they had these very real conversations where they're obviously trying to keep things civil and appropriate because it's the workplace, but deep down, we all know that it's just a facade. This movie was surprisingly really funny. It definitely requires you to embrace the awkwardness, and it will probably be best for viewers who can relate to Fran in some way. And it does have some good, funny examples of how awkward, more intimate interactions can be for introverted people, like going to a party where you don't know anyone, or dating as an adult. It's also kind of refreshing watching a movie about dating where sex is just completely absent, both visually and narratively. This movie is about delicate human emotions and not really desires. The humor in this movie might be a bit cringy for those of you who are prone to secondhand embarrassment. A lot of jokes play off of Fran's awkwardness, but not necessarily at her expense. The movie wants you to laugh with her and not really at her. But if that type of humor is hard for you to watch, or if office humor just doesn't sound very funny, then this movie probably won't be all that funny to you and mostly just be really depressing. Similarly, all of the shots of Fran doing Monday, day-to-day things could really bore a lot of viewers if you don't really understand how it all pertains to her isolation and depression. Like, I recognize why all of the shots are relevant, but I think that a lot of viewers will actually feel that they're muddling the story. And the opening scene is a pretty serious cliche. We've seen a lot of movies start off with the main character waking up, getting out of bed, getting ready, and then just carrying out their normal workday. The story also might feel a bit aimless for some viewers because she doesn't really have a clear objective throughout the movie. But more than anything, it's a character study on a small town introvert, so I don't really think that it needed one. It does feel a little bit weird for me to justify that, considering that just this week I criticized the movie for being aimless, but I swear that it makes more sense here. So Daisy Ridley gave a great performance here. It might seem like a very subtle one that's not even worth recognizing, but she does a great job portraying body language that is clearly very anxious and closed off. She's always crossing her arms and keeping her hands to herself, and she generally avoids making eye contact with her peers. These are all very common indications that someone is very uncomfortable around other people. This movie's visual style was a standout. There are some really good visual metaphors for how Fran feels around others. And the cinematography was almost completely static, which I thought was really clever. There are almost no camera movements in this movie. Frequent static shots can be used for a number of reasons. They give us a very intimate connection to the subject matter on screen, forcing you to search for the deeper meaning behind what's being said and depicted. In this movie's case, it's a constant reminder that there's something else going on with Fran, that she's very uncomfortable and sad. The static shots keep us thinking about how she really feels. They can also give us the sense that we're not necessarily watching something cinematic, but instead watching very realistic and relatable bits of life. There's also something to be said about how important static shots are to comedies. You typically won't see substantial camera movement in a shot where a joke is being told because they just kind of distract the viewer from it. So a lot of modern comedy scenes and commercials will use static shots across the board to give us the sensation that everything is silly and not a single line should be ignored. I think it was a good choice to go with tripod shots across the board because in addition to the connection that it gives us to Fran, it makes a lot of scenes kind of feel silly and a bit awkward. When you think about it, this movie easily could have been much more depressing in the hands of a lesser director. But with the tone created by the combination of the stable cinematography, the cringe humor, and the charming but somber music, a very charming and warm-hearted movie was made, which is surprising for a movie with such a chilling title. Surprisingly, this movie actually feels a lot less about thoughts of death than it does social disconnect. Like, the thoughts of death are there and could certainly play a hand in her isolation, but it almost feels like it's actually just the other way around. Like, her isolation and insecurities are the cause for the thoughts of death. It leads me to think that maybe they should have gone with a different title because, you know, this one is just a bit on the nose and for some viewers pretty deterring. But I also do recognize that not titling this movie after Fran's thoughts of death might not leave us with the same impression of her throughout the movie. I'm personally impartial to the title, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts in the comments. So even if this movie isn't that funny or relatable to you, at the very least, I think it's capable of providing some insight on what the people around you could be going through. If there's anything to learn from this movie, I think it's that you should perhaps think twice before prying into people's lives when they clearly seem very closed off. And also maybe don't give somebody a psychoanalysis of them to their face. I think if you've ever had somebody comment on your general behavior, you'll probably know what I mean when I say that it's an incredibly invasive thing when somebody literally critiques you, making light of things that most people would be very insecure about. But this movie isn't preachy. It makes you think about things like that without shoving anything down your throat. Overall, this movie is a somber but humorous study of the human condition. This movie is great, but totally not for everyone. Again, if secondhand embarrassment or if depictions of depression and anxiety sound bad, then this probably isn't for you. Otherwise, I think it's one that you should definitely go see at the theater if you can find one that's playing it. It's in pretty select theaters right now, so you might have to wait till it comes to streaming. Thank you for watching this review. If it brought you any value at all, please give it a like. It really helps this channel grow. I'll see you later this week with my reviews of Madam Web and Bob Marley One Love.